Good day, welcome to you. This is Westchester Talk Radio, westchestertalkradio.com, produced by Sharc Creative. That is Sharc with a C, not a K, S-H-A-R-C, Creative. I'm John Marino, and glad to have you for our Cup of Joe political show here on Westchester Talk Radio. And we are brought to you by, made possible by our good friends at Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center in Buchanan, where they promise to keep us powered here in Westchester right through April of 2021. Lipolis Electric, don't be left in the dark. And by Hightower Westchester, managing your wealth to a fiduciary standard. Today here on Cup of Joe Political Show, we are joined by the county executive here in Westchester, our good friend, George Latimer. Mr. Latimer, good to see you again. Different venue. Those venues seem to change from time to time through the years, but the fact that you are always Johnny or George on the spot, no matter what is going on in Westchester for the last 30 plus years, you are always there, always on the spot. And I have to say, people I've spoken to and from what I've seen, obviously, the job you have done during this pandemic, that's what leadership is about. And I want to get into the pandemic, the COVID-19 response. We are 3 months into it. We've had ups, we've had downs. Where are we right now with the county's response?
Well, John, thanks. And let me just open by saying it's always a pleasure to be with you many times because I have a face for radio. We did our best work on the radio together, but I'm happy to be with you here and with Sharc Creative. As we're speaking now in the middle of June, heading toward the end of June, we've seen a big drop in the degree of infection and what that represents in Westchester County. At late March, early April, which is about a month in from our first case, we were exploding. We had 1,200 people in the hospital with COVID. We were just starting to see the death toll rise. There were nights where we lost 35, 40, 45 people die in a particular night from COVID-related illnesses. And we had active cases, about 12,000, meaning people that had tested positive but had not gone through a 2-week period. Now, here at this point in time, 3.5 months into this, we're seeing the downside of that bell curve. The bell curve rose steeply in March. It topped out in the first week of April, and it started to flatten, the great flattening of the curve, and then it's been going down since then. As we speak now, we have about 100 people, as opposed to 1,200 people, hospitalized for COVID. We've gone through the last 3 nights, 2 nights. We've had no overnight fatalities. We had 1 fatality in the third night, which is a lot further down from 50 to 75 that we've had in the past. We've tested now over 212,000 people. And given the base of population as 1 million people in Westchester County, that means we've tested almost 22% of our population, which is a huge percentage. And the public health professionals tell us that you have to test in order to know how widespread the contagion is. So the more we test, many more people test negative, but of those that test positive, we're able to try to, the best of our ability, isolate them so they don't infect other people. If 80% of the people who get the disease do not get sick from it or seriously sick from it, and we isolate them from infecting other people, that's how we get our handle on this until the day comes where we have a vaccine and we have an antiviral drug. So right now, the numbers are good. Nobody is individuals. Certainly our medical professional people are looking, for the vaccine and the antiviral as fast as they can. As soon as that appears on the scene for society, we'll be that much ahead of the game. But the impact of COVID is in a couple of other different ways. Obviously, the Governor Cuomo used his executive authority to shut down most of our society here in New York State. Other governors did the same thing. And so that has helped, amongst other things, create a real economic problem for individuals, for businesses, for not-for-profits, for governments. And we're dealing with that aftermath. And we're also dealing with the aftermath of how comfortable people feel going back out into the society, going back to their place of business, going back to dining in a restaurant or being outside in a public context. It's a matter of consumer confidence. So when you can open up things, as we've been doing in phase 2 now that we're in, I know we'll talk about this in greater detail in a second, but the COVID impact also is because people are talking maybe a second wave. Is this the end of the first wave? While it's coming down in New York and New Jersey and Connecticut, it's going up in other parts of the country. There's a lot of fear out there. And that fear will drive consumer comfort. And whether or not we fully engage in the society economically again will depend on how well we can project that we're getting a handle on this thing. All of those things, John, are still up in the air. We're working on them every day.
You mentioned that we're in phase 2 right now. What does being in phase 2 mean, and how do we get to phases 3 and 4? How quick do you think we can get there?
Well, the governor laid out a game plan fairly early on. He divided the state into 10 regions. We are in the Hudson Valley region, a very logical region. It's Westchester, Putnam, Dutchess, Rockland, Orange, Ulster, Sullivan counties. And within that region, we had to meet certain metrics in order to start to reopen. And those metrics included how many people we tested, how many hospital beds and ICU beds we had available in case there was a surge need, where we were in terms of declining hospitalizations, declining overnight fatalities, new hospitalizations, and then a tracing system whereby that we could start the process of contact tracing, which is a process by which if I get the disease, you ask the people that I've had direct contact with, I give you a list of them, you call them, test them, isolate them, and try to keep the spread. All those 7 metrics had to be met. A number of weeks ago, I guess 5 weeks ago now, we met enough metrics to open to phase 1. Phase 1 opened up construction projects, it opened up manufacturing, it had some partial openings of retail. There were certain businesses that were deemed essential that never closed, pharmacies and food markets and so forth. And then of the things that did close, they started the reopening process in phase 1. We are now halfway through phase 2. These phases generally are 2 weeks in duration. So what we have now is a phase 2 opening, which allows us to open barbershops and beauty salons. They're open now. I got my fresh haircut over the weekend. They've been able to open churches at a certain capacity. I happen to be Roman Catholic. I got to go to Catholic Mass a couple of times during that period of time. Outdoor dining has now been made available. I've had a chance to do that a couple of times, as have other people. Most all of the retail establishments are open. All the strip malls are open. The mom and pop stores on our main streets and downtowns, all of those are open. Our major department anchor stores are open, but not the internal mall stores. Those are not yet open. And all of that under phase 2, the governor in each of these different regions is watching to make sure that we maintain the downside of the infection. We ourselves as a county government had control over our parks throughout this. So during the period of time of the last couple of months, we slowly opened our golf courses, then we opened Bicycle Sunday, we've extended Bicycle Sunday, then we opened beaches, 2 of our beaches, and now we're looking at doing pools. We're doing them slowly and methodically in some sequence so that we don't increase the spread. And of course, the statistics I gave you up front represent the continued diminution of the spread. Now, a week from today, actually less than a week from today, a week from the next coming Tuesday, which is 6 days away as we're having this conversation, if all goes well, we enter phase 3. Phase 3 will open up restaurants more fully. And when they open up restaurants more fully, that means the indoor as well as the outdoor capacity is there, but not at 100% capacity. They'll have to reduce the capacity to maybe 50% of what it normally would be. If you have both outdoor and indoor dining, then the hope is that these restaurants will start to show the kind of business that will start them back on the road to some financial health. And there are a lot of personal care facilities open in phase 3. I'm not a big tattoo guy, but tattoo parlors open, waxing and tanning parlors open. There'll be a host of sports, tennis and kayaking and sailing and a host of things that haven't been opened yet will open. All of this was laid out by the governor's metrics, and as we continue the downward presence, then we open more and more. Phase 4 would follow phase 3 by 2 additional weeks. So if next Tuesday, June 23rd, is the opening for phase 3, if all goes well, another 2 weeks later, July 7th, would be the opening of phase 4. And phase 4 will be more broad-based organizations. There'll be more people per public gathering that will be allowed. High school graduations that could not be held in June could be held in the month of July. I guess that'll probably be the last month that you're going to have the high school seniors around to do graduation. Some of the high schools are going to do that, and that will help open the door. It's a complicated process, but what you have to remember is that some folks say, open the society, open it now, let's go. There are other people that say it's too soon, we haven't seen the second wave, we don't want more fatalities. We have lost over 1,400 people in Westchester County, aggregate to this. And some people want to see it shut down. The middle road is, in my judgment, the wise road, which is open gradually, open assertively, and when you open, test, keep an eye out for the numbers. If the numbers are good, keep opening it, because you need the society to function again. But at the same token, you don't want to do it willy-nilly at the risk of public health, and you won't have people comfortable interacting in the society again unless you show that you're being measured, and you're doing things with a public health mindset.
You talk about pools reopening, camps reopening too. The impression you've gotten so far from people, do people feel safe enough that they think, okay, it's good, it's time to go back now?
I think it depends. I think it depends on the item that you're opening. We opened golf courses, and there was a bit of hue and cry over that because some folks said everything should be shut down. And golf has the image of being an elite sport. Our public golf courses do not attract the wealthiest folks. They're already members of the private courses that are in this county. But golf is naturally a social distancing sport. I don't play it, but if you and I were playing around the golf, I'm not getting near you at the tee box when you tee off. And the ethics of the sport is that you don't even get in the line of sight of the golfer when he's putting out on a green. So that social distancing is built into the situation. At the other end of the spectrum, we're getting ready to open pools a week from this weekend and then 2 weeks from this weekend, and that's hard to social distance. When you have a beach, you have a line, and on one side of the line is the water, and on the other side of the line is the beach, and people can go in without interacting with each other. A pool is a finite area, usually rectangular, it could be circular, and people sit all around the pool, and people go into the pool and come out of the pool. That's different. That's harder to socially distance. So we're trying to figure out, how do we do that effectively? How do we open a kiddie playground when kids don't understand? They're just going to cluster and touch things, and how do you keep it sanitized? As we figure out how to manage this, that's how we can open things. And if we can manage it well, then the people who are nervous about this, and there are plenty of them. I know, but any number of people who say, gee, I'm not comfortable. Somebody else says, hey, let's go. Somebody else says, no, I don't think so. You have to, if you want to have 100% full restoration of your economy, it's not just the people that are dying to get back out there that you worry about. You worry about the people that are recalcitrant. And how do you convince them? How do you show them enough effort and diligence that convince them that they can come back out into the society? And that's what we're trying to do with every decision we make.
County Executive George Latimer here, Westchester Talk Radio. I'm John Marino, Cup of Joe, political show. George Latimer, we have people who, like you say, some are okay with coming back out as soon as possible, and some are a bit wary. With people being a bit wary, obviously, that affects shopping, people going to stores. The past few months due to the pandemic, hardly any tax money coming in at every level locally. The budget, county finances, the need for federal help. Tell us about that.
Well, we made an estimate within the last month, and depends on what the state does in terms of their cutting state aid to the county. But our $2.1 billion budget, which we adopted last December, it cut property taxes by $1 million. It was a good, solid, sound budget. First time we cut taxes in 9 years as a government. We had a good balanced budget. We were moving fine. January, February, all looks well. Middle of March, maybe the 10th of March to the 15th of March, things start to shut down, and we fall off a cliff. We drop like a stone. We estimate between $100 million to $130 million of sales tax revenue as we estimated. And the estimate assumes that we come back online at some level as we're going through the summer into the fall. If we're not fully back, that number gets closer to $130 million of revenue. We lose a certain amount of revenue from the hotel taxes because the hotel industry is badly decimated by this. There's nobody, literally nobody at these hotels right now. They're not traveling. We've lost money, revenue money from many of our recreational programs. The golf is going fine, but, and we are opening our summer camp programs, but we're opening at reduced levels, so we're not going to get the same revenue. When you go through all of that, there's a host of other different things, federal money, state aid, and so forth. We have a gap in revenue that began at $181 million gap, which could be as high as $247 million gap. That is a huge amount of money. Just to give you an idea, if you raise property taxes 1% in Westchester County, 1% county taxes, you generate $5.5 million of revenue. When I tell you that I've got a $181 million gap at the low end, you can't possibly raise taxes to cover that. So you need other things to happen to solve your problem. Now, we've already identified from that, we'll take the low end number of 181. We already identified $21 million of rearrangements that we could do in the budget, things that we would do differently. We would borrow to do things that we would otherwise cash up for. So we took the 181, brought it down to 160. We narrowed the gap. We now have, we think, in our pocket about $48 million of additional combination of revenue and cost controls. We believe we've underestimated our federal transit aid. We believe we've underestimated our Medicaid FMAP monies. Now, this is kind of inside baseball. There's other savings that add up. And we haven't even tried to put a pen to paper on our coronavirus reimbursements for the things that were actually in the last coronavirus. But let's say there's another $50 million that we could take the gap down. So now we're taking the low end number from 181 down to 160, another 50 down to 110, and we could possibly have another $40 million worth of possible actions and activities we could take. So now we've taken that gap down almost 2/3 to 70 million, but 70 million is still a huge number.
So we're going to have money you're talking about.
Yeah, it's gobs of money, and that's the low end number. If the state hits us with loss of state aid, the low end 100, 110, 120, or 70, that number balloons up to 160, $170 million. So we're certainly going to look at a voluntary severance initiative, something where we go to our workforce and say, if you agree to sever, we'll give you a cash payment. And we're working out the details. We're running past the respective unions and board of legislators. And if a certain number of people say, okay, I'll take the cash reason to leave, and then we don't fill those positions, we have a savings to the county. How many million that will save? So it depends on how many people take the offer, but we'll make some offer along those lines. There's still a number of different areas where we can cut costs without cutting services. Although it gets harder the closer you get down to the zero number, because you're closing things that are of value, but you just say, well, they're valuable, but they're not as valuable if we have to go to the nth degree. The last stop on the train will always be layoffs, because human lives are affected when people are laid off, and it's nothing that you embrace ideally. But what could bridge the gap would be additional federal aid. And I don't have a magic number in my head as to what that federal aid would be. I don't think we'll get a dime until we make every effort on our own to try to close the gap. And I think at some point in time when we've exhausted what we think is every measure to close the gap, when the state has exhausted every means of being able to help us, that's when we reach the point at which the feds look around and say, hey, we did not create the pandemic as a county government. We did not mismanage the finances of the county government. But once decisions were made at higher levels of government to shut down industries because you wanted to reduce the spread, there was nothing we could do about it except try to weather the storm. So that is, as I've said before, the second of the three great challenges. First challenge, deal with the public health issue. Number two, deal with this economic crisis, which is an individual crisis and it's a business crisis too. It's not just what happens to government. And then, of course, the third one we're dealing with now, the racial justice issues of the society that also have to be addressed that have reached a fever pitch. So, I've got more cut out for me.
You talk about cutbacks, changes that you have made, changes you can make, other cuts you can make. How do you decide as a county executive or anybody in any public position as a state senator, an assemblyman, a city councilman, et cetera, things you've been through the years, how do you decide what gets cut and what doesn't? How do you set priorities as to we have to totally fund this or mostly fund this, and this we can kind of drop it down to here. If the money comes back, then we can raise it up again.
We have two major sources of input. The first input are the professional team that you bring around you, the people in county government, many of whom work in a civil service context. They were here before I got here. They'll be here after I'm gone. But the executive team that I brought into place, I'm very proud of. And I take pride in their skill set. John Nona, our county attorney, Joan McDonald, our director of operations, Emily Saltzman, our deputy director of operations, and Catherine Chaffee, who heads our communications efforts, Steve Bass and Intergov, Ellen Hendricks and Susan Spear and Blanca Lopez, and a host of people. I've left out names that I shouldn't have left out: Sherry Asher, Richard Gibbons, and so forth. And then our commissioners, all of whom are tasked with looking at their particular areas of responsibility and determining what spending can we cut without cutting into the bone. And secondly, are there any areas of revenue? Because we found some areas of revenue. Peter McCart, our director of sustainability, did a hell of a great job in identifying a company that will pay the county money to reduce our energy intake during the summer months, New Energen. That brings revenue into the county that's not tax-related revenue. John Nona negotiated a deal with Airbnb to collect a certain amount of money from Airbnb on behalf of their member organizations. That was money that we didn't have before. And if you go back 2 years ago, my first year in office, Joan McDonald, John Nona, we negotiated the Liberty Lines bus contract, which also saved us $20 million over the life of the contract, a 5-year contract. Vince Kapicki from our Department of Environmental Facilities negotiated a contract primarily with Wheelabrator for our disposal of garbage, which saved us 17 million over 10 years. So savings of monies and finding new revenues are part of how you do this. So the first place of input is inside the government, the experts, the people who have been doing this. They consult with people. We talk at the state, we talk at the federal level, we try to make some decisions. The second area of input is the one that I get every day in my comings and goings. Now, I don't deal with as many people face to face now in person as I would have normally. In a normal day, I'd be in the office a certain number of hours, and I'd be out in the community. I'd be seeing all different types of people, talking to them and listening to their opinions, coffee and conversations on the weekends with county legislators, a host of different public forums and sessions that we've had on the airport and on shared services. You name it, we've had public meetings on it to listen to public input so that I hear what average everyday people are thinking. And I think I've done that very aggressively and very well, not just in this job, but over my whole career. You've covered me in all those positions you've mentioned, and it's been my way of operating, just as a normal thing. It's not like, oh, let me go out and listen to people. This is something new. And what average everyday people do is they give you context, not just for how they feel, but for what they want to see and what they're willing to sacrifice. And that informs you, along with the internal expert advice, and out of that comes decisions. And here's the thing: I'm going to admit something that most electeds, many executives never admit. Sometimes I'm wrong. Sometimes I make a bad decision, or the decision I make isn't effective as I'd hoped it would be. The crime isn't in making a bad decision or having a bad policy. The crime is in perpetuating the bad decision out of pride or out of hubris. When you double down on a mistake because you can't admit I made a mistake, or I did something that I shouldn't have done in the way I did it. It's almost now in politics unheard of that somebody says, yes, I was wrong, and we're going to redirect our efforts. But my attitude from my business career, long before I ever got into politics, was the mission is to accomplish the end goal, not to look good doing it per se. And if you find a problem and you correct it, that's the goal. And we've tried to do that in certain areas. And I think, frankly, it's kind of refreshing when people say, oh, George Latimer, regular guy. I may not live on the street that they live on, but I'm like the guy who lives down the block. And he talks, normally. And by the way, he, like all of us, he understands that he and his team can make mistakes, and we correct and we go forward. John, that's the only way you can deal in uncharted waters. There is no roadmap for how to handle a pandemic and a financial freefall and a racial justice issue. If the Depression was the worst financial situation, it didn't come with it a pandemic and a social justice issue. If the late 60s social justice was roiling our inner cities, it didn't come with it a pandemic and a financial freefall. And if the pandemic of the 1918, 1919 era was the last big pandemic like this, it didn't come at a similar time of financial freefall and so forth. So we've got all three right now. I'm a county executive, I'm a president of the United States, I'm a governor of the state of New York. Those jobs are harder, they have a broader base thing. But facing those three problems is a test. And I've said this is not an original thought, and probably other people have said it too, so they can claim credit for it. This is the test of my generation. My generation is a little old now. The baby boom generation, we're pretty old. And we went a long time before we had a test. Our parents were tested in the Depression and World War II. My grandfather went to World War I, and they had that pandemic that hit in the days of influenza. Lost my mother's younger sister died in the influenza pandemic in those days. So they survived their challenges. We went through 9/11 and we survived it. We can get through this, but we don't get through it by saying, "Oh yeah, everything is fine. There'll be a cure tomorrow and everything will bounce back." That's an irresponsible way to look at this. This is tough. We're going to work through it. We're going to sacrifice. We're going to be smart, and we're going to get through it. But it's also, being realistic about what happens when not one or two, but three big things hit you at the same time. You have to be ready. And I know I'm talking kind of like a long, nonstop narrative here, but all of the things that were important to us before the pandemic hit are still important. We have an affordable housing crisis in this county. We want to make improvement in our environmental objectives in this county. We were and want to once again get our finances back on a fair track in this county. We have infrastructure that we have to improve. We fixed the Miller House. We fixed the Spray Ridge pools. We're not there yet on Playland. There's assets that we have that deteriorate, and we don't want them to deteriorate. We want to turn over to my immediate and future successors a county that functions as well as it functioned in the years before I came into office. All of those goals exist separate and aside from the pandemic, the financial freefall, and the social justice issue. So I wanted the job, I ran for it, I won it, and now I got it. And the idea is, George,
you got them all at once together.
Let's see what you got under the hood. Let's see what you got in this engine of yours.
County Executive George Latimer, before we pivot to social justice, on a positive note, new drive-in theater in Westchester. I know you want to talk about that too.
Well, this is what I wanted when I was a teenager, in the days when the drive-in theaters were starting to disappear. But we have tried to do the classic make lemon out of lemonade situation. So we know that we're able to do certain park functions. I've mentioned a number of them that we already have put back into effect or going forward. But some of the park functions we can't do. We've made the decision to cancel our ethnic festivals at Kensico. They're wonderful. If you've been there, John, I'm sure you have. Italian Day, an Asian Day, an Hispanic Day, and so forth. You have just thousands of people. There's food, there's dance and music and vendors. It's a great time. We can't do those things at Kensico. People are too close together. There's no way to ensure that they wouldn't advance the spread. So what do we do with this big empty Kensico Dam Plaza now that we can't do those things? So we're going to try this year, instead of having movies under the stars for kids to all cluster together, we're going to do drive-in movies. We have a Friday night in July and a Friday night in August set aside. You're going to stay in your car. Actually, you can. What they actually would permit is, because we're going to space the cars out of the parking lot, you can actually take your lawn chairs and go out in front of your car and sit outside of your car and look up at the movies. It's not exactly a drive-in, although we'll work this out so that you turn to a certain radio station, number, and that'll pick up the sound on whatever the movie is. We've got a couple of family-friendly movies. No action flicks that are going to scare the little kids where things blow up. We don't want to show them that. But we'll have a couple of fun movies, and we're going to test it out. We're looking at something similar at Playland as well, because since we're doing this by cars and not by individuals, there is a defined limit to how much can go to Kensico. But since we're not going to be doing fireworks, we're going to do these things, and who knows, maybe they'll catch on, and next year, when everything is back to normal, we hope, we'll still do drive-ins on a couple of nights, because it'll be fun, and it'll be something that you can remember. If the family's all together in the car, mom, dad, the kids, it could be a nice night. So that's what we're hoping for.
And in a car, you can social distance, maybe not in the car, but from everybody else, all the people in the other cars.
We could also have mom, dad, and 3 kids going crazy. So
that too.
It's also a possible outcome of this. Since I'm now in grandfatherland rather than young fatherland, it's a little less direct a concern for me. But we'll let the families work it out themselves.
And also the new bicycle path on the Tappan Zee Bridge, just opened up by the governor a few days ago.
Yeah, that's a great innovation. It was promised as part of the redo of the bridge, and now it's come through. They have some very beautiful plazas on either side. I have not seen the plazas yet. I intend to go over and inspect them, but that's a great advantage. And of course, we buy into this as well. We've put serious money in the improvement of the North County Trailway, which is a walking trailway, but also a bicycling trailway. We put, I think, $8 million into that, and that people have told me that really looks great. We have improvements to be made to the South County Trailway to follow. And then in addition, as we mentioned before, we went ahead with Bicycle Sunday the first weekend in May. There were people who said, well, this is really dangerous, don't do it. But we did it. We thought we were doing the right thing, and it's turned out to be the right thing, as the contagion did not spike because of Bicycle Sunday. And through the generosity of the Westchester Parks Foundation, Con Edison, and the Moriarty family, were able halfway through, almost done. July, August, September, October. So that's a really good long Bicycle Sunday run this year. So between the Tappan Zee connection, the improvements in the North County Trailways, and the extended Bicycle Sunday, we certainly have seen cycling as being one of those recreations that we can expand on.
The social justice issue, after the events in Minneapolis, Atlanta, other places we're hearing about now too, how has this affected life in Westchester the past few weeks, and what do you see down the road? What can the county do to make sure that everything is as equitable as possible when it comes to issues like social justice?
Well, these issues have been around for a long time. They didn't start with the death of George Floyd, but the video and the murder of George Floyd really crystallized them in people's minds. And there have been other incidents that have happened over the years. We've had some incidents in Westchester County And what has accumulated now, frankly, is the African American community saying that we have lived for a long period of time under the thumb of racism, and we're tired of it. We want to see change. We want to see change in the way policing is done. We want to see the way change in the way society is structured, because those of us whose skin are black should be treated no differently than those of us whose skins are white or Asian or Latino or any of the ethnic groups. I grew up in Mount Vernon, as you know. You've heard this story 1,000 times. As a white kid in a black neighborhood, and the social diversity of my life growing up there, and then later in life, and my different other experiences in the arc of my life, have put me in contact with things that I never personally experienced, but for which I could see, and we knew there needs to be change. So there clearly needs to be reform in the way we go about doing our business. And some of it involves the policing, but some of it involves the society at large. It's not just the police. It'd be very convenient for people to say, oh, there they are, those police, they're the reasons for these things. And the incidents that trigger this were police incidents. Most of the police I talked to, all the police I've talked to, have criticized George Floyd as what he did was just outside of the bounds. Pardon me, what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd was outside the bounds of proper policing. No one I have heard defends what happened on that day in Minneapolis a little over 3 weeks ago. What our response to this is now is to try to be smart and measured. We are paneling, it's not quite finalized yet, a large group of people to meet, individuals who come out of the police law enforcement world, but also out of the community activist world, people from the clergy, people from certain business experiences, to look at those elements of county public policy that affect law enforcement, criminal justice in general, and make recommendations for changes and reforms. Is it laws we need? Is it changing the way we educate all new police recruits at our police academy? Wherever you are in Westchester County in a local police department, you have probably gone through the 13-week training at the academy, which the county runs, even though the county's police department only governs certain, or only police certain very specific areas, the parks, parkways, and around contracted police, the streets of Mount Kisco as part of that. So we have to make changes in our system, but we have to do them intelligently, and we have to do them cooperatively. I hear people say things like defund the police. Well, out of the anger of the moment, I understand why people are angry when they say that, but we fund already far more in social services than we fund in police services. So I don't want to hold everybody accountable for what individual bad apples do. And I want to make sure that our police departments change for the better, broaden the scope of their training, broaden the scope of their anti-racist training and orientation, but also to recognize that there are good people in policing as well, and that we have to have that balance. In the same way that some will castigate everybody who's out protesting and calling them looters and rioters. We have had in the vicinity of 30 rallies in Westchester County. Some have been marches, some have been rallies in place. We've had them in our urban centers, we've had them in our suburban communities. Not one of them turned into a looting or a rioting situation. And I find it offensive when I hear people sort of blithely allude to that. I can't speak for what happens one night in Atlanta, one night in Seattle, or a week in Seattle, but I can talk about the streets of Westchester County, from Yonkers in the south to Yorktown in the north, how Westchester residents have behaved, and they have gathered for protests, but they have not become violent or lawbreakers. And so in the same way that I don't want to hear people criticize people who stand up for social justice and they rally and say, oh, look at those young rioters and looters, that's wrong. I don't want people to look at the police department and say, oh, look at all those racist cops, because that's wrong too. Let us, as we do in Westchester, find an intelligent, rational way to make this better, so that a young black man does not have to fear that his life is going to be taken away for something very trivial. But at the same time, where our law enforcement officials, properly trained, do the job that we ask them to do, which is put themselves out at the times of night that we don't want to be out as civilians. And I think in this county, every time we've been able to sit down and talk and break bread together, make common ground together, we make progress. And that's why people love living in this county and stay living in this county. If, the point in your life comes where we want the warmer weather and admittedly the lower taxes, then you can move to a warmer climate. But while you're in your peak years, while you're earning New York salaries, and while you're raising your children in the best possible environment, people come to Westchester and like to stay here. And I want to make sure that we improve that in the area of social justice. We show empathy to people that are the subjects of racism. No white man can understand what it's like to be black in this society. No man can understand what it's like to be a woman, be harassed. So let us try to be empathic and understand as best as we can what we have to do to make this thing better. And let's make it better. Let's do it in as quick a period of time as we can to show the world that at least in our little corner of it, our little 1 million people, that we respond to these things and we don't ignore them and sweep it under the rug. And I think we can do that.
Now, County Executive George Latimer, before we wrap up here, I have to say, you've been around in Westchester politically for about 30 years now. You started over in Rye, the city council, I guess. You were on the county board, a state senator, 37th
Can't hold the job, John. I can't hold the job. I keep bouncing around.
37th district, which ran from, and we've talked about it through the years, from Yonkers all the way up to Katona, with so many divergent interests and issues there, different ways of life. Did this prep you, the Yonkers to Katona thing for so many years as a state senator, prep you for what you do now as county executive from bottom to top, bottom of the county, Yonkers, all the way up through Peekskill and Amawalk and Somers and Yorktown? And there are so many different ways of life, divergent interests, and yet you have to bring it all together.
Well, I think my time in the Senate and the district that I represented for those 5 years was extremely helpful to me because, as you point out, there was great diversity in my Senate district. I had parts of urban centers in White Plains, New Rochelle, and Yonkers, 3 of our 4 big cities. I had places in the same district like Bronxville and Portchester. And if you can figure out how to represent both Bronxville and Portchester, then you've earned something. The northern part of the district that I served in the Senate was definitely a part of northern Westchester. The problems of northern Westchester, issues of sewerage and issues of low density and difficulty in delivering services in the same way that you do in the more densely populated areas of the county, were very much on my mind. When I was in Banksville, Armonk, portions of Bedford, I'm looking at all of northern Westchester in that microcosm. When I'm in the heart of Yonkers, I didn't represent my old hometown of Mount Vernon, but when I'm in parts of Yonkers, I'm seeing what was happening in Mount Vernon or in Peekskill. And I think in each of these different assignments, the Senate being the most broadly based one, you understand how important it is for you to talk to all different kinds of people. I have people come up to me every so often, and they're agitated. I understand, sometimes because of something I did, or just generically, I'm the politician within reach. So whatever they're angry about at any level of government, they direct it at me. And I try not to take personal offense by it. But they say something like, "You politicians don't understand. You live in a world of your own. You don't know what we go through and how we suffer." And when I hear that, I marvel that they know that, oh, well, George Latimer's a senator, or he's the county executive. They don't know that on South 14th Avenue, my mom worked in a factory and my dad was a maintenance man every day. They don't know that. They don't know that I commuted to college. I didn't go away 4 years, have the 4-year experience living away. I worked through the 4 years that I was in college. I didn't pay my way through, but I had to contribute to it. And how I would go into, I went to Fordham in the Bronx. I'd go to Fordham during the day. And as soon as I got off, I went back home, primarily lived with my parents, although I moved out a little bit later to go across town in Mount Vernon. And at that point in time, how I did what I had to do to go where I had to go. So I talk to people in Bronxville and I talk to people in Portchester every day. And sometimes when I reach somebody who's agitated, I say, have you talked to anybody in Bronxville lately? Have you talked to anybody in Portchester lately? How about middle-class folk in Eastchester or the Rhinebeck section of Mamaroneck? And now, in the countywide scope, when was the last time you were in Peekskill or Pelham or Pound Ridge? So people who immediately assume, because they think so poorly of those of us who are in office, they just assume that we're out of it. We don't care. We don't know. And because I happen to be older, I'm old and therefore I don't get it. Well, I don't get what it's like to be a teenager today. I was a teenager like in 1968, which was not a great year to be a teenager, to be honest with you, in the society. But you try to learn how to be empathic. You try to learn how to absorb. And I think I do that, as well as anybody does. I look at the other people who've held this office. There have been some great, effective county executives. Al Del Bello, Ed McCallion, Andy O'Rourke, who I did serve with. We had our conflict in 2 different parties. I was here during the Andy Spano years. I read about what the predecessors to McCallion, Blakely and Gerlach and Hopkins did, so much so that we named conference rooms after them. So I'm a student of these things, and I sit in this office knowing, as the 9th county executive, there'll be a 10th, there'll be an 11th, there'll be a 12th county executive. I'm not the end of the story. But while I'm here, I'm going to draw the judgments from my corporate years, from my years as a kid in Mount Vernon, from what I did from graduate school, where I learned structurally about statistics and macroeconomics and organization theory en route to my master's degree. I'm going to draw from the experience I've had in other positions in government, what I learned when I was in what I learned while I was in Albany as a state legislator, what I learned in the Rye City Council, and I'm going to bring all those things together. And yet, I'm going to sit at the head of a table of other talented people. I'm going to listen to them, and I'm going to trust them, and I'm going to give them the ability to run their departments with the minimum of influence from the corner office and to make political judgments. And I think that will be the best possible way to get results. We've had results already. I'm proud of what we've accomplished so far pre-COVID. I hope we get through this COVID thing as well as I trust we will. But at the end of the day, and people say, well, you're a Democrat. Do you really have a... The most important American value is the sense that freedom and the ability to function in a free society makes you optimistic, that you're free and that tomorrow you can make a better day for tomorrow. You can find a way to work together, and you find a way to make this thing go forward. I'm not president, I'm not governor, I'm not going to be, but in this particular job now, late in my life, tested by all these different challenges, I'm prepared now to draw all those things together with a great team and give people of Westchester the best possible result. And then turn the car keys over to the next person when that person appears.
And since 1990 or thereabouts, I have to say, you haven't missed a baptism, a wedding, a bar mitzvah, anything like that around the county of Westchester. And that's your reputation. And very few.
Hippie Flynn from Yonkers, Joe Delfino of White Plains, even my good friend Paul Feiner of Greenberg, all have the same reputation. So I'm in good. Jack Lombardi from North Castle, I'm in good company. When the Beach Boys sing "Round Round, I Get Around," I'm in good company.
Get around. The County Executive George Latimer, pleasure to have you with us here. Cup of Joe Political Show, Westchester Talk Radio. Hope we get to talk real soon. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Stay safe.
All right. Great to see you again. County Executive George Latimer. Cup of Joe Political Show here. Westchester Talk Radio, westchestertalkradio.com. Brought to you by, made possible by our good friends at Entergy, the Indian Point Energy Center. George has his mask on, as we are all supposed to do. White Plains Hospital, also Wartburg Healthcare and Rehabilitation in Mount Vernon. Park Sterling Realty, and our good friends at Michael Labriola, Landscape Construction and Design. Landscape Design and Construction at Michael Labriola. We are Westchester Talk Radio. Catch all our Westchester Talk Radio programming on our YouTube channel at Sharc, S-H-A-R-C, Sharc Creative YouTube.